Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. And today, we have an exciting book because it's the second last book in the Bone Chillers series, and it's also got some interesting facets to it. So, the first part I alluded to in the last episode, which is that this book, for some reason, is incredibly expensive on the second-hand market. It's the most expensive one that I have in my collection, but as I said, I paid about $50 for it, but I've seen hundreds of dollars expected for this book, and I have to say, it's not worth it. Now, that's not actually a criticism of the book and the story. I actually kind of like this book, but the issue is that these are meant to be children's books, and it frustrates me so much that things are becoming so expensive, that things that are meant for kids aren't something that a kid can ever get into their hands, even if they saved up all their pocket money. It's ridiculous. Now, I had a much longer rant about this, talking about economies and things like video games and predatory practices and consumerism, but I don't want to go down a whole rant on that, so I'll just leave it at that. This book, it should be worth maybe twice the registered retail price plus inflation, because I do recognize that keeping a book like this in good condition does take effort and labor, but $50 for a book that on the very back says the recommended retail price is $3.99? Come on. But that's not as important as the second thing this book offers, because this book is called Killer Clown of Kings County, which, side note, I think that might be one of the reasons why it's more expensive, is that it's somewhat rare. Now, all of the books at the tail end of this series are more expensive. It tends to happen with series because as they're getting to the end of their run, they're not publishing as many of the books because not as many people are buying them. That's why they're ending the run in the first place. But I have a sneaking suspicion the reason why this book is more expensive than the last book is that it's called Killer Clown of Kings County. I would not be at all surprised if this was on a few banned books lists because it's called Killer Clown. So who wants to have their kids read a book that's about a clown that kills people? Now, mild spoiler, this clown doesn't in fact kill people. I think you could suspect that it is involved in... You know what? We'll have to get to that in the actual book itself. But yes, the second thing I want to talk about in this book is the fact that it's about clowns. And I find that very interesting because there is a fantastic, interesting, intricate history of clowns and horror and all of these things. So, I mean, first things first, we all have heard about horror comedy or comedy horror. And when I was younger, I didn't really understand why you put the two together, because comedy is meant to be relieving, whereas horror is meant to be unsettling. But it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it. When you look at the mechanics of both horror and comedy, they have a lot in common. After all, both of them are about visceral reactions that we have, whether that be laughing out loud or jolting, jumping, or screaming. Like, these are both visceral reactions that are entirely conscious. And then both of them often deal with that tension and relief, that build-up. For the comedy, it's often the build-up of something that's unusual and strange, that's then revealed and the tension's broken by the punchline. Whereas for horror, it's often that build-up of tension that's broken by the release of tension when that horrible thing actually happens. And just as I've said before, I said it in the introductory sort of teaser for this series, that horror and horror stories has been used to educate children, to instill morality. The same is actually true of comedy, because whilst we think of clowns as just being silly and bouncing around, the history of clowns goes back to sacred clowning of the South American peoples and the Hayaka and other priestly clown classes. And there's also even the jester of European history, the only person in the king's court that could make fun of the king. Both of these have the same purpose. I mean, admittedly, sacred clowning has more to do with spirituality, and it comes from the power granted to them by, I believe, thunder gods, depending on the South American... I'm not South American myself, so I can't speak with authority on where the authority of the sacred clown comes from, but I can tell you that whether it's a jester, or a Hayaka, or a sacred clown, what have you, the purpose of them is to be ridiculous and have people recognize that their actions are ridiculous, to reinforce that other people should avoid that thing. So the jester makes fun of the king because to do that is wrong, and that's why it's funny. It's establishing that it is humorous to do something so ridiculous as question the king. And in sacred clowning, it's the same thing. It's reinforcing cultural norms, such as I've heard that in South America, some of these sacred clowns would interrupt rituals and other forms of welcoming ceremonies to make fun of them. But it also offered the opportunity to question them. After all, if a jester makes fun of the king and people laugh, but they keep thinking about it, then there is the possibility that the king's ultimate power could be questioned. So even though it reinforces societal norms, it also gives the freedom to question those societal norms in the hopes of reinforcing them. But if you've got a particularly nasty king, or you've got a particularly pointless ritual, then the people in the society might start thinking, you know what, maybe the clown's got a point. Now, I've done a bit more research into clowning because I've found it fascinating that these days people associate clowns as being creepy, and that happened mostly because of Stephen King and It, and the hoax, and it was a hoax, of the whole clown attack thing that was happening in the early 2000s. I wanted to know why clowns were scary, and so I did a bit more research into clowning for some stories that I'm working on. I'm not going to spoil any of that stuff, but the point is that there's more to clowns than just being a silly guy with a red nose on. And whilst I don't know how much research the writer of this book did, I have to say that it does bring up some of those concepts. Speaking of which, the writer of this book is one we've seen before. It's Daniel Ehrenhaft. He's the same writer who wrote The Thing Under the Bed, a book which I enjoyed despite some of the flaws in the research. So, I don't know, again, if they did the research for this one, but I thought it was a much more interesting book. So, I think this intro is getting away from me, so let's just get into it and explain why I like this book so much. So let's dive into the summary of Bone Chillers number 22, Killer Clown of Kings County. So we start chapter 1 being introduced to Zeke Simpson, our main character, because today is his 12th birthday. But he's hanging around in his room, not really keen to go downstairs, because his mum hired a clown for his birthday. And that's got to be the lamest thing ever, right? I mean, he's 12 years old. Everyone knows the cutoff date for clowns is about 4. And not only that, he knows for a fact that his 2 friends are downstairs. And whilst he loves his friends dearly, both Joanna and Eddie have a habit of picking on each other and him and pranking each other. He joins in on it as well. And he knows that if he goes downstairs with a clown, they're going to make fun of him for the next month. But his mum keeps calling to him, "Come on, Zeke, the clown's here, come on, Zeke." And so, as much as he doesn't want to, he just decides to bite the bullet and he heads downstairs. And when he does, he runs into the birthday clown. And he's going to be the main antagonist for this story, so I'll let the book introduce him to you in its own words.
"Is that Zeke Simpson I hear?"
boomed a low, gravelly voice as Zeke walked down the stairs.
"Zeke Simpson, the birthday boy?"
Great, Zeke thought. Just great. What's-his-face was going to make a big deal about his birthday. This was going to be even worse than he had expected. When he reached the bottom stair and turned into the living room, he froze. This was going to be much worse than he had expected. His mum and dad had cleared away the couches and coffee table. All 17 kids were sitting comfortably on the grey carpet. Everyone was staring at him. Nobody said a word. Zeke caught a glimpse of Joanna and Eddie at the back of the crowd, sitting side by side. Joanna was smirking. The mild queasiness Zeke had felt upstairs suddenly kicked in with a sickening jolt.
"So, this is the birthday boy, huh?"
said a voice behind him.
"Not much to look at, is he?"
Zeke whirled around angrily. "What?"
"Just kidding, my boy,"
interrupted the clown. He extended a white-gloved hand.
"Pleased to meet you. Idris Zanzibar MacLeod at your service."
Zeke paused for a second, scowling. He peered at the guy closely. At first glance, Idris Zanzibar MacLeod looked pretty much the way Zeke had expected. His face was painted white with red cheeks and a round red knob for a nose. Orange frizzy hair stuck out from underneath his oversized top hat. He was wearing red floppy shoes and a baggy black polka dot outfit. There was a big fake yellow flower pinned to his shirt, but the longer Zeke looked, the more he realized there was something different about this clown. He just didn't have a smile painted on his face, but his expression wasn't exactly sad either. It almost looked as if he was sneering. Yes, as a matter of fact, Idris Zanzibar MacLeod looked kind of mean.
"Well, you gonna shake my hand or what?"
the clown demanded. Slowly, cautiously, Zeke moved his hand toward Idris's glove. He shook his head. The guy's voice was weird, too. Normally clowns had goofy, high-pitched voices, didn't they? But Idris's voice was low and sinister, almost like a growl. Zzz. Ow! Zeke yelped. Something had shocked his hand when he touched Idris's glove. It sent a shiver of electricity through his entire body. He snatched his arm away. Behind him, he could hear everyone cracking up. What was that? He cried. Idris shrugged and held out his palm. In it, there was a little red button.
Joy buzzer,
He replied.
oldest trick in the book. You gotta watch yourself around clowns, Zeke.
Zeke could feel his face getting red, but before he could say anything else, Idris put his arm around him and steered him into the living room.
So, I hear you don't like clowns too much.
Idris whispered loudly. A few of the kids giggled. Wait a second. Zeke had never said he liked clowns, but he hadn't mentioned anything about not liking them either. If he had, his parents wouldn't have hired this jerk to perform at his party. He shook his head, flustered. I never said...
Don't worry about it,
Idris cut in.
I'm not a big fan of most of them myself, but have you ever seen a clown who can do this?
Idris reached into his mouth and began pulling something out of it. It was a purple handkerchief, and he didn't stop pulling. There was another handkerchief tied to the end of the first, and another tied to the end of that one, and another, and another. Zeke's eyes widened. Idris kept pulling the handkerchiefs out of his mouth until he had a rope of them that must have been at least 5 feet long. Then, with a final brisk tug, he pulled the last one out and deftly wrapped them all up into a tight little ball.
Now, watch carefully,
He instructed. In a motion almost too fast for Zeke to fully see, Idris tucked the ball of handkerchiefs under his top hat.
So, what do you think they are, birthday boy?
Idris asked. Zeke hesitated. He glanced at Idris's hat.
You're looking at my hat,
Idris said with a sly grin.
Well, I don't think they're under my hat, Zeke Simpson. I think my purple hankies are under your hat.
And with that, Idris yanked Zeke's blue baseball cap off his head and held it upside down in front of Zeke's face. Sure enough, the ball of handkerchiefs was sitting inside of it.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Idris cried, waving the hat in front of the kids.
I present to you Zeke Simpson, the great handkerchief thief.
Everybody sitting on the rug burst into applause. In spite of himself, Zeke suddenly started laughing. The great handkerchief thief? He stared at Idris, who winked at him. Zeke shook his head. As much as he hated to admit it, Idris's trick had actually been sort of funny.
The old purple handkerchief gag,
Idris whispered quietly under the sound of the clapping crowd.
Gets him every time. So what do you think about clowns now, Zeke?
Zeke's voice trailed off. He wasn't sure what to say. He had gone from feeling embarrassed to angry to amazed in the space of about 10 seconds. One thing was for sure. Idris Zanzibar MacLeod may have been weird, but he definitely wasn't boring. He wasn't like any clown Zeke had ever seen. Maybe his mum hadn't made such a huge mistake by hiring this guy after all. I do kind of like the way they introduce Idris here, and he's got some interesting magic tricks. They sound like they're somewhat funny. My only little issue, and it's not even a big issue, is just that I noticed, especially because I did the impression for this podcast, that the voice of Idris is almost entirely just Pennywise as performed by Tim Curry, the deep rumbling, they float down here, like it's literally the same voice, sounding like a growl. But I still like the way it's done. There's that sinister edge, he's got a smirk instead of a smile. He's also pulling handkerchiefs out of his throat, implying choking, Also, he does appear to have the ability to read minds. And in fact, at the end, when Zeke was thinking, oh, Mum didn't make a bad decision here, Idris responds out loud and says, nah, your mum made a good choice in hiring me. And before our kid could even think about that too much, Joanna, because of course she has to, she calls out, oh yeah, the great handkerchief dork, has to pick on him somehow. And before our kid could feel too bad, Idris pulls him aside and says, don't worry about it, I'll sort this. And so he then picks out a new volunteer, choosing Joanna to get up on the stage. And so he starts pulling jokes on her. He does the old squirting flour trick, squirting her in the face. And when her face is drenched, he offers her a tiny towel that's too small to wipe her face. And then when she finally, reaches for it, he grabs a giant blow dryer out of his back pocket and he blasts her in the face with it. And it's so ridiculous that everyone starts laughing, even Joanna starts laughing, except Eddie, because he's still freaked out by all this stuff. But this scene ends with the cutting of the cake, and the kids are all lining up to get cake. But Zeke doesn't want to get cake, so he walks up to Idris, who's still standing with Joanna, and he's saying, you know what, you're pretty cool. And Joanna agrees, yeah, you're pretty fun, and Idris basically says, oh, so you all know your friends, you like joking around, you like pranks. Well, I want you guys to be my apprentices. That's right, you, Zeke, Joanna, and even your friend Eddie, I want you guys to learn all of my tricks. I've got a clown college, you come, you learn how to become a clown, and I'll teach you everything I know. And pretty quickly, the kids accept. So this is going to be our story. The kids are going to be trying to learn to be clowns, go to this clown college, right? So time skip, we cut to the next day, and the kids are heading towards the clown college. But the first thing that's a little creepy is that it doesn't seem to be in the suburbs or even in the city. It seems to be the sort of grimy industrial area of town, and they're getting a bit lost. They can't really find it. And whilst both Joanna and Zeke seem pretty excited to get to the school, Eddie is still acting all tentative, saying, "Oh man, it's dangerous, guys, maybe we should turn back." And finally, they both confront him and ask him what on earth is going on. So finally, Eddie admits it. He says, "All right, but promise you're not going to make fun of me." And because their only character trait is that they prank each other, they're both like, "We can't promise that, Eddie." And he's like, "Okay, well, at least try." Because the thing is that those tricks he pulled, they didn't seem like tricks. I mean, think about it. How did he know both of your names without asking? How did he use a hairdryer that wasn't plugged in, didn't seem to have any batteries or anything? How did he pull those things out of his throat? I think there's more to it than that. Both his friends are dismissing him, saying, that's the whole point of magic. You're not supposed to tell how it works. But he says, no, but it's more than that. See, my brother told me a story. He said that a long time ago there was a clown. It looked like him. He had a top hat, and he said he had a clown college. But he said that every kid that went to the clown college disappeared. And if you don't believe me, he said it was in the news. He said you could look it up yourself. Several kids went missing, and the culprit was never caught. I actually like the way this is done, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of the summary, but Joanna just bursts out laughing because it's a creepy story told to him by his older brother. Of course, he's just pulling a trick on him, like old brothers do all the time, and she even gives examples of how he's done it before, but Eddie's still freaked out. But before the kids can discuss this any further, suddenly Idris appears right alongside them. And the first thing that stands out is that he's still wearing his clown uniform. Like, there's a little explanation for it in this scene, but I like how later on, so that building attention, he shows up in it again and again, even when he's not performing. But he shows up and says, "Look, I've been looking for you kids because, you're late for class, and I figured you must be lost. And I've been called out for an appointment, so there can't be any clown college today. But that's okay, I'm glad I found you, because there wasn't going to be much. There was going to be an introductory lesson anyway. All I really wanted to do was to give you your Great Clown handbooks." And so he then takes out 3 small black leather-bound books with gold lettering on the title, because the fact that they're meant to look kind of expensive is part of the story, it's part of the plot. So he gives them all each one of these, and then he says, "Oh, and I wanted to give you each a gift." So he gives Eddie his clown nose. He gives Joanna a purple handkerchief, because now she's the great handkerchief dork. And he gives the top hat off his head to Zeke. And I like, the hat's actually too big for him, so it falls down to his shoulders. He has to take it off. And then Idris says, "Oh, one last thing before I go. This is the golden rule of clowning. Never forget this." And all the kids lean in, and he says, "Never try to beat a clown at his own game." And before the kids can really ask what this is all about, he vanishes in a puff of white smoke. So the kids are heading home, and Joanna and Zeke are still geeking out about this. They're checking out the book. It's got 3 sections in the Great Clown Handbook. There's Living Your Life as a Clown, which the kids skip because that sounds boring. Then there's Gags, Stunts, and Tricks, which talks about all kinds of things that you can pull at the show, the kinds of things that Idris was doing at Zeke's birthday party. And then it ends with Showstoppers. These are the big finales. And Joanna even points one out that's called the Box of Doom, where you can get a kid to step into this black box, and then you say a magic chant, and then you can tap the box and make it collapse, and the kid will disappear. And there's also a moment where Eddie, getting sick of all this, because a day ago they all thought clowns were lame, and now they think it's the coolest thing ever. They won't stop talking about it. So the kids basically promise, okay, we won't talk about it if you promise that 1, you'll read the book tonight, the Great Clown Handbook, and 2, you admit that maybe you're overreacting about this killer clown stuff. It's a fun scene, but for the plot it matters because it means that he's going to read it that night. So our kids go to their respective houses, and there's a scene where Zeke talks to his parents about how he didn't really have clown college, and his dad says, "Are you a bit is it cold outside? Your cheeks are a bit red." And I liked the subtlety of this until literally a sentence later when the dad says, "Oh, and also your hair's turning red." So this is another thing, is that the kids start changing into clowns. I kind of wish they hadn't done it so quickly, but I guess it's just the way the plot runs, because the next morning when Zeke wakes up, his hair is even redder, and he assumes it must be some sort of a stunt pulled by Idris. Maybe he put hair dye in the hat, and so now his hair's turning red. But when he tries to wash it out, it doesn't work. And also he realizes that he lost the handbook. It's a minor detail, but the night before, he put down the top hat, and then he put the book in the hat because he wanted to put the clown stuff together and keep them safe. And then the book disappeared, and so now he can't find it anywhere. And so when he's trying to look for it, his mum rouses on him because the school bus is there. He has no time, so he has to grab his stuff, run out the door. And when he gets on the school bus, he's in time for the bus, but he sees that Joanna is sitting there, and she's wearing a baseball cap on her head with all her hair tucked under it. And so he sits beside her, and she doesn't want to talk about it, but he says, so does your hair look like mine? And he lifts his baseball cap to show his red hair. And so then they start talking about it, saying, it's probably just a dye gag, you know? But Joanna says, that's impossible, because she had a shower 8 times in a row to try to wash this stuff out, and if anything, the hair looked brighter. But more importantly, both Joanna and Zeke realize Eddie isn't on the bus. I love this. I love the slow building tension. Like, what's going on? How could this work? And so when our kids get to school, instead of going to school, they run to the nearest payphone. Which, for you young whippersnappers, too young to remember, before everyone carried a mobile phone and cell phone in their pocket, phones had to be attached to wires, and so if you wanted to use a phone in public, you'd have to go to a payphone, which was a phone attached to its own little housing that you'd have to put coins in order to use. But the point is, they call Eddie's house, and Eddie answers the phone, and he does confirm, yeah, his hair's turning red, but that's not why he's not at school. He says that he tried on the clown nose that Idris gave him, and he can't get it off. So then, next chapter, time skip. But even though it skips time, we still have that build-up of tension because the kids arrive at the front of his house and they're walking up thinking, what could possibly be wrong with our friend? And they knock on the door and he carefully peeks through the doorway and they can't really see his face until he unlocks it and he lets them inside and they see that he has a red bunch of hair on his head. He doesn't actually have the clown nose on. And they're saying, what's going on? He says, well, let me show you. So he goes into his room. And I love the subtle horror. This is some of that DIY horror. They see all throughout his room, there's wrenches and tweezers and clamps, a hammer, and then it says there's dozens of other tools they didn't recognize. So I love the fact that you can sort of imagine him trying to tear this nose off and it doesn't work. And then there's this I love this because if the body horror wasn't enough, when Zeke sees all the tools around Eddie's bedroom and he imagines him having to try to tear this nose off, he bursts out laughing. But what's weird is that even though his body is reacting, he doesn't find it funny. He finds it horrifying. And Joanne even points out, why are you laughing? He could have torn his nose off. And in fact, Eddie says his mum was going to book him a doctor's appointment in order to get this thing off. So they might have had to, amputate. But this shows that they're slowly turning into clowns. And Eddie points this out saying, I understand why you're laughing, even though you don't find it funny. It's because you're turning into Idris. We're all turning into Idris. His friends both try to calm him down by pointing out that he got the nose off, so this can't be that bad, right? But Eddie says that that's the freakiest thing of all. The way he got it off was with the handbook. He shows them the page with the instructions for temporary removal of a clown nose, and it says to grab it, say a rhyme, and then pull. It says that's all he did. And if a wrench and a hammer and tweezers can't pull this thing off, but saying a silly rhyme did, that can only be one thing, right? And Zeke immediately dismisses saying, hey, I don't know if you know this, Eddie, magic doesn't exist. But no matter what they believe, Eddie says he's done. He's done with Idris, he thinks he's evil, and whether it's magic or not, he gives the clown nose and he gives his handbook to Zeke and says, you have it, I'm not doing clown college anymore. And I do like the way they characterize these kids, because the same people who pull pranks also do dares and stuff. And so Zeke says to him, look here, I'll try this. And if you're right, and I need to use a magic spell to get the nose off, I'll quit clown college too. But, if I'm right and you're wrong, you have to pay me $1 million. And to hammer it home, Eddie says, yeah, sure. Heck, I'll pay you $10 million. So, Zeke heads home, and he heads up to his room, and he decides to try this out to see if it's real. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out Eddie's clown nose. Even though he wasn't worried about getting it off, he didn't exactly want his mum to see him looking like a clown. Here it goes, he whispered. The clown nose made a little slurping noise as he jammed it onto his face, almost like a vacuum cleaner. Slurp. Zeke twitched. The nose was a little tight. In fact, he couldn't breathe through it. Hello, my name is Zeke, he said out loud. It sounded as if he had a bad cold. Hello, my name is Zeke, He chuckled once and headed up to his room. Maybe I'll just leave the nose on after all, he thought. He pushed open the door to his room. It would actually be pretty funny to go to school looking like Idris. All at once, he frowned. His room was a shambles. Of course, he spent all morning searching for the Great Clown Handbook. He wriggled out of his jacket and dumped it on the floor, dropping it right next to the upside-down top hat. As soon as he took the nose off, he'd start looking for the book again. But right now, he had to prove that Eddie owed him $10 million. He grabbed the nose and yanked it. Nothing happened. He yanked it a little harder. The nose still wouldn't budge. Finally, he put both hands on it and tugged with all his might. "Ouch!" he yelped. That time, it had actually sort of hurt, but the nose was still stuck to his face. He couldn't believe it. He was sure the glue had been all used up by now. Obviously, he was wrong. He gave it one last desperate pull. There was no point. The nose was stuck to his face. His breathing grew a little faster. He glanced around his room for something, a pair of scissors, a clamp, but there was nothing. Come to think of it, there was nothing in his house he could really use at all. The Simpson family didn't keep many tools around. Eddie had tried a wrench, after all. The Simpsons didn't even own a wrench. Zeke could hear his heart pounding in his chest. Would he just have to wait? He swallowed. Eddie had been forced to wait almost an entire day. He began pacing around his room. His knees were wobbly. What had he been thinking? He should have listened to Eddie. He should never have made that dumb bet. Suddenly he froze. His jacket was lying there on the floor, and inside his jacket pocket was Eddie's copy of the Great Clown Handbook. Zeke shivered. Had Eddie been right? Did he actually have to say some lame 4-line poem in order to get the nose off? At this point, he really didn't have anything to lose by trying. He had to get this nose off any way he could, as fast as possible. His mum would be home any minute. With trembling fingers, he took the book out of the jacket pocket and opened it to page 48. He put his hand on his nose. Then he whispered as fast as he could, "Nose, nose, jolly red nose, why it sticks, no one knows. I'll unstick it with this rhyme and stick it back some other time." Then he pulled it as hard as he could. Thwack! It puffed off into his hand. For a moment, Zeke just stood there, staring at it in disbelief. "This can't be happening," he said to himself feverishly. "It has to be a coincidence." Just then, a bizarre idea occurred to him. There was one way he could prove if this magic stuff was coincidence or not. His copy of the book was still missing, and the last place he had seen it was inside the top hat. He tossed the nose onto his bed and flipped to the section entitled Gags, Stunts, and Tricks. There! His eyes flashed over the page. Instructions for making objects disappear and reappear into magic top hat. Step 1. Drop object into upside down top hat. Step 2. Hold top hat right side up. Step 3. Recite the following chant. Pickles, onions, sauce, and kraut. Make this, place name of object here, come right out. Zeke frowned. That chant was even more stupid than the first one, but it seemed easy enough. He'd already taken care of step number 1. He grabbed the hat off the floor with his free hand and flipped it right side up. Then he whispered, "Pickles, onions, sauce, and kraut. Make this handbook come right out." There was a thumping noise at his feet. Zeke's stomach twisted painfully. In a way, he really hoped he had lost the book. He held the top hat aside and looked at the floor. There on the floor, right next to his sneakers, was his copy of the Great Clown Handbook. The gold lettering glittered in the sunlight that streamed through his windows, and that could mean only one thing. Eddie was right. Building tension. Thy name is Clown. Oh, I'm loving this. But then Zeke gets a phone call from Joanna, who basically says, "Look in the mirror." And when he does, he sees that not only does he have the red cheeks, his face is now completely white. His hair is totally orange and frizzy and huge. He's got a little pink dab on the end of his nose. Even without the clown nose, he looks like he's got a full clown face. So he gets back on the phone to tell Joanna that this is impossible because they were just with each other. They saw that they just had the red cheeks, but clearly the transformation has gotten worse. They are now fully clowned. And this is coming out of their skin. They can't wash it off. So even after he hangs up the phone, when his mum comes home and she sees him, he has to make up some lie saying, "Oh, it's for clown college. Yeah, I was practicing with makeup." And then he has to ask. He says, "Where did you learn about Idris?" And his mum insists that she just found it in the phone book. So he goes and checks the phone book under C for clowns, and there's only 2 clowns on offer, both of them party clowns, and neither of them are named Idris, and they definitely aren't at the address for the clown college. Personally, I don't think this is necessary. I think it's creepy enough. Like, if he's in the phone book, that's kind of even weirder because it means that anyone could have called him up. But no, I guess it's sort of going for this psychological thing, and as we're seeing at the end, he doesn't want just anyone to find him and go to clown college. That night, Zeke isn't hungry, so doesn't eat dinner, and he just goes to his room. And there's a moment where he has a laughing fit, another one that he just can't control. It's not funny, but his body is just making him giggle. And when his mum checks on him, he tells her, you know what, I think I'm done with all this clown college stuff. And his mum doesn't take him seriously, because not only is he wearing all this stuff, but he was super keen. And I like the subtle implication that, because, there's the whole trope of the Cassandra truth, where a kid or some main character tries to tell other people about the horrible conflict of the story, but they just don't believe them. But I like the fact that in this story, it's not just parents being dumb and not listening to their kids, it's because he's a clown. Of course you're not going to take him seriously. I'd like that. It's a cute little aspect that makes that trope more acceptable. So the next day, Zeke grabs both the clown handbooks, throws them both into the top hat so they disappear, and then he grabs the top hat and goes outside because he's going to throw the stuff all in the bin. But he gets confronted by Idris. Once again, fully clowned up because, as we know, he doesn't have makeup on. This is just what he looks like. And there's a bit of back and forth here, sort of establishing just how creepy Idris is. And the thing I really like is that when he asks what he's doing at the top hat, he takes it from Zeke and he just taps the top and the books fall out. And Zeke realizes that he didn't need to say the rhyme, and when he asks why, he says that it's because he's a professional, and real pros don't need to say those silly little rhymes. It's a simple thing, but it does show that he's a much more powerful clown than the other three. But now that Idris has the top hat and the two books, Zeke finally says, you know what, I want you to keep it all, because I don't want to be a clown anymore. And Idris, he doesn't exactly look angry, but he's not smiling anymore when he says, I don't think you want to do that, Zeke, because once you start being a clown, you don't stop. And then Idris offers him another gift. It's a joy buzzer, and he offers it to Zeke, who doesn't trust him at first, because a joy buzzer zaps you, that's the whole thing. But he says, oh no, don't worry, it's turned off. But of course, when he goes to grab it, it buzzes him, and that's when Idris says to him, oh, that's one of the things you ought to know by now, Zeke. You can never trust a clown. Then Idris bursts out laughing, and Zeke runs back into his house, and Idris disappears. So the next day, Zeke heads to school, because his mum didn't believe that the stuff is growing on his face, so she said, hey, if you're going to put this stupid stuff on, then you're just going to have to go to school like that and bear the consequences if you get in trouble. So when Zeke trudges onto the bus, it's not hard to find Joanna, because she's sitting in their usual seat, but also she's got a baseball cap tucked tight with all her hair into it, and she's got a scarf wrapped so high up on her face that you can just see her eyes. She's like a ninja, because she's hiding all of the clown makeup as best she can as well. And when the two of them are just sitting on the bus commiserating, then Zeke gets squirted in the face with a gag flower, and Joanna explains that it just blossomed on her jacket this morning and she can't get it off. So when they get to school, Zeke says that they should get rid of all of this stuff once and for all. So they head to the dumpster, the one around the side of the school. So Zeke throws both of his copies of the book into the garbage, and he says, alright, now it's your turn. And I really like this. I talk about the Cassandra truth trope. Well, another trope is a character just having the idiot ball saying, oh, maybe not, how about we hesitate? But I like this because Joanna says, no, I think I want to hang on to mine. And when Zeke's saying, why on earth would you want to hang on to it? This is part of the problem. And she explains, no, but think about it. When Eddie had his nose stuck to his face, the only way he got it off was with the handbook. This is the only way we can control this stuff. And come on, you got to admit, she's right? I love this little moment. And even Zeke agrees, and he says, okay, maybe we'll meet at lunch and we'll talk about this stuff. By the way, do you know why Eddie didn't come to school? And there's this cute little bit of foreshadowing, because the chapter scare ends with Joanna saying, I don't know, maybe his nose grew back. So our kids head to class, and this is the one bit of the story that I think is a bit silly, is that when he's at the door, the teacher sees him, and he questions why he's dressed like that, and Zeke doesn't have an answer, so Mr. Powell just says, must be a fashion statement. Really? Fashion statement? You're going to go with fashion statement and not schoolyard prank? But anyway, our kid goes into class, and the teacher then starts going for the homework. He wants to score the homework, but because Zeke's been worrying about all this clown stuff, he hasn't done his homework, so when he's called on, he gets in trouble from the teacher, who approaches him, and he goes to hand him the chalk so he can come up to write the problem and the answer on the board, but when he touches his hand, the teacher is shocked, and that's when Zeke realizes that just like the flower that grew on Joanna's chest, a joy buzzer has attached itself to his hand. And so, of course, he gets into trouble. He's going to get detention. He just effectively assaulted a teacher with electricity. So he heads to the principal's office, and in the waiting room he sees Joanna there, who explains that as soon as she got to class, that stupid gag flower sprayed the teacher in the face, so she got detention as well. So Zeke decides, and Joanna agrees, that they need to deal with this stuff once and for all. They can't worry about school or any of this other stuff. They need to deal with the clown stuff now. So they both decide to get out of the waiting room, and they run away from school. And first things first, they head to Eddie to see what's going on. Oh, but there's a little moment as the kids are heading there, and I like that this book is dealing with it before we get too far into the end. Like, this is 2/3 of the way through the book, but at least it's early enough that the kids are saying, we need to deal with this, but I'm not 100% sure how. We need to get Idris back somehow, and they assume the way is through the golden rule. You remember that golden rule, don't you? Never try to beat a clown at his own game. I like it because that did sound like a threat, but at the same time, the kid's right. Maybe that wasn't a threat. Maybe that was a hint. Maybe Idris said it because that's what he didn't want them to do because it would hurt him. Or maybe they were saying, never try to beat a clown at his own game because you either have to succeed or something bad will happen. So they get to Eddie's house, and he's confused that they're not at school, but they explain that they escaped because they got in trouble. And sure enough, he does have the red nose back on his face. And they realize it's because the book very literally said that the instructions were for temporary removal of the red nose. So of course it's going to come back again and again. So they think about getting the Great Clown Handbook to see if they can get the nose off again, or maybe see if there's a spell that's not temporary but for a permanent clown nose removal. But when they turn to Joanna, she has a horrible look on her face, and she suddenly spits up a purple handkerchief, and when she pulls it, there's one that's tied to the end, and then another, and she's desperately muffled gagging, doing this. She's like, she can't talk because she's got cloth in her mouth, and she's basically choking on it. I mean, thankfully she can still breathe, but because it's coming out of her throat, she can't talk. This is genuinely horrifying. So Eddie thinks, okay, we'll deal with this first, because that's more important than my nose. And so he goes to get the handbook from Joanna, but when he does, the gag flower squirts him in the face, and he gets angry, saying, what the heck are you doing? Why would you do that for? And Joanna tries to say that, but she's got cloth in her mouth she can't explain. And so then Zeke is trying to explain, okay, look, she did do it on purpose, but then he suddenly bursts out laughing in that laughing tick that he's got. And the kids realize that not only is the clowning changing them into clowns, but it's also turning them against each other. And I really like this because not only is it great for the story, but it's a common gag when you've got multiple clowns that they clash, that one of them wants to be top clown. So, it's common that they will pull gags on each other. I really like this scene because in a show it's funny, but in real life it's kind of horrifying. But just when they come to this realization, there's a knock at the door. And we know who it is. It's Idris. He bursts through the door and yells out, "Surprise!" And at first he's just laughing at the predicament all these kids are in. But when they're saying, "What do you want?" he says, "Well, I want you to come to Clown College. My clownmobile is waiting." And sure enough, there's a limousine sitting out the front of the house. And since they don't really see any other options, the kids follow him and they get into the limo. I like that they all sit in the back seat and Idris sits in the other seat facing them, the faces backwards. And so we get a bit of a villain monologue moment. And I really like this scene. Idris tapped the window and the limousine slowly began easing down the street.
"Smooth ride, huh?"
Idris asked. Zeke squirmed in the cushion. He had never felt more helpless in his life. Nobody said a word. Idris laughed.
"Why all the long faces? We're going to Clown College."
"I think you just answered your own question," Eddie mumbled dismally. Idris stroked his panted chin.
"Eddie, for some reason, I have this funny feeling that you're not very excited about going to Clown College. Am I right?"
Eddie didn't answer.
"Now, this wouldn't have to do with your thing your older brother told you, would it?"
"What?" Eddie gasped. He shot a quick, accusatory look at Zeke. "How did—"
"It was nothing Zeke told me, I assure you,"
Idris interrupted. His sneer grew more pronounced.
"I just make it my business to know these things."
Zeke's face fell. If he had ever had any doubts that Idris could really read minds, these doubts had just been erased.
"You see, Eddie, your brother was right. Up to a point. That clown in the black hat was me, obviously."
He pointed at his top hat.
"But nobody disappeared. They just all went on to become clowns. Some of the world's greatest clowns, I might add."
"Yeah, but it wasn't like they had a choice," Eddie spat. "You turned them into clowns." "In front of the mumble," Joanna added, frowning. "Easy," Zeke thought nervously, biting his lip. Making Idris angry now wouldn't do any of them any good. Not when they were trapped in his car. But Idris just laughed that annoying laugh of his.
Really, you two think too much of me. Nobody can turn anybody else into a clown. The clown spirit lives in all of us. I just choose the right people, the ones who will let that spirit grow.
His voice grew solemn.
I just give those people certain tools to help them on their way.
Zeke frowned. Like the Great Clown Handbook?
Precisely,
Idris said, sounding satisfied.
Or like Eddie's clown nose, or like Joanna's hankies, or like...
But why did you choose us? Zeke demanded. I never had any clown spirit. I always thought clowns
were for dorks,
Idris finished impatiently.
Yes, I'm sure you believed you thought that, but when you saw me perform at your birthday, you changed your mind, didn't you?
Zeke couldn't respond. He felt totally ill. He couldn't even bring himself to look Idris in the eyes anymore, because Idris was right.
You see, Zeke, you do have clown spirit,
Idris said quietly.
You just didn't know it at the time. All the trash talking you did, all the pranks you pulled, these were all the makings of a clown. I'm just helping you put on the finishing touches.
Well, what if we changed our minds again? Eddie yelled. What if we stop pulling pranks? What if we never want to see you again? Idris raised his eyebrows.
You, Eddie, give up pranks?
He started laughing hysterically.
Never in a million years. You're always going to have one more chance to put a whoopee cushion under Mr. Powell's chair.
And water splattered over Idris's face. Zeke's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe it. He turned to Joanna. She was squeezing her flower as hard as she could, but the spray had quickly shrunk to a messy dribble over her coat and the purple handkerchiefs. Idris ran a polka dot sleeve across his face. He blinked several times. He wasn't laughing anymore.
Nice one,
he said flatly. Zeke tensed. There was a look in Idris's eyes, a look Zeke had never seen before. His pupils seemed unusually large and black. He looked enraged. Uh-oh, Zeke thought. But suddenly Idris's face returned to normal. He chuckled once.
There you have it, that pure clown spirit.
He glanced at Eddie.
See, Eddie, your friend Joanna has it. But to answer your question, we have a little test for clowns who think they've changed their minds.
Eddie licked his lips. What's that? He asked nervously.
Well, you remember the Box of Doom, don't you? The last trick in the Great Clown Handbook? You see, the reason it's called the Box of Doom is because it spells certain doom for all those who've lost their clown spirit.
Idris leaned forward and lowered his voice.
It spells certain doom for anyone who doesn't appreciate a good gag.
Zeke swallowed. What are you getting at?
It's quite simple, really,
Idris said, leaning back in his seat.
I just drop each of you into the box. If you're a true clown, then you pop right out.
He paused.
And if not...
Zeke glanced at Joanna and Eddie. Their faces were as petrified as his. Idris laughed.
Well, there's no point worrying about that. We're all clowns here, right?
I have a lot to say about this, especially this whole concept of clown spirits, but we will talk about this at the end of the summary. For now, what matters is that they get to the clown college, which just looks like an ordinary house. And Idris explains this because, if it looked like a big circus tent, everyone will be flocking to it. But this is a very select school. Like he said, he only picks people with clown spirit and people who enjoy a good gag. And that's when an idea starts forming in Zeke's head. As they are heading up the stairs of this house towards the front door, he realizes that every single time that something happened to Idris, he didn't find it funny. He doesn't appreciate a good gag when it's pulled on him. And so an idea starts forming in his head. But in the meantime, they open the door to the house and they head inside. And it's very dark inside, got a high ceiling, and in the center of the room, there is a black box. So Idris shows them how it works by taking one of the Great Clown Handbooks. And he reaches over the box and he drops it, and it vanishes. And the important thing is that they never hear the sound of it fall. It just seems to disappear into nothingness. Because after all, it's a book, not a clown. Only a clown can step out of the box of doom. And honestly, the ending's so good, I'm just going to read it straight out of the book. This is fantastic. If Idris were telling the truth, if the evil black bottomless box spelled certain doom for anyone who didn't appreciate a good gag, then they really could beat him at his own game. Before he even allowed himself to think any further, he sprang forward and snatched the mass of purple handkerchiefs from Joanna's grasp.
Zeke, what on earth do you think you're doing?
Idris barked savagely, but Zeke didn't answer. Instead, he began running around the room wildly, waving the purple handkerchiefs over his head. Joanna stood still, looking utterly shocked. Her jaw hung open with handkerchiefs pouring out of her mouth as if she had an endless spool of them inside her stomach.
Get back here, you little creep!
Idris shrieked. He began chasing after him.
This isn't the time for this nonsense!
Why not? Zeke yelled breathlessly. I'm a clown, aren't I? Idris didn't answer. He just growled. In spite of his fear, Zeke couldn't help but smile as he raced around the room. Finally, Zeke thought. That growl certainly didn't sound clownish, not in the least. They had beaten him at his own game. But Idris was right on his heels and closing fast. Somehow, Zeke had to get him into that box.
Sorry, kid.
Idris's voice was right behind him now.
But I told you I was going to have to teach you some manners.
A cold, heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder. Instinctively, Zeke dropped the purple handkerchiefs and whirled around to try to yank the hand off. Buzz.
Yikes!
Idris screamed.
What the?
The joy buzzer! Zeke had completely forgotten about it, but there it was, still stuck to the palm that had just touched Idris's clammy fingers. Idris staggered backward toward Joanna, nursing his shocked hand. His face was wrinkled in pain and confusion. Zeke knew he didn't have a second to lose. His plan suddenly came together before he even had a chance to think through it. Joanna, spray him! Zeke cried. Without hesitation, Joanna jumped in front of Idris and squeezed her flower as hard as she could. Idris tried to spin away, but he was too late. The watery blast caught him full in the face.
No!
Idris clasped his hands over his eyes.
Stop this!
He spluttered, weaving back and forth in front of the box of doom.
I command you! That's enough! This isn't funny!
But his voice sounded more bewildered than frightening. Zeke grabbed the end of the handkerchief rope off the floor and began running in quick little circles around Idris. Within seconds, he had wrapped Idris's polka dot legs in a tight purple binding.
What are you doing?
Idris demanded. He tried to kick, but his eyes bulged when he found he couldn't move. He teetered from one side to the other, following Zeke with his eyes.
Stop that, you fool!
Finally, Zeke let the handkerchiefs drop. He slid down on all fours in the narrow space on the floor between Idris and the box of doom. Eddie, push him hard, he cried. But of course, Eddie had already seen what was coming. Before Zeke had even finished yelling, Eddie was bounding forward at full speed and lowering his shoulder.
No!
Idris yelled. Zeke squeezed his eyes closed. He held his breath as Eddie came barreling into Idris. Oomph! Idris groaned. Zeke felt Idris's body slam against his side. There was a moment of confusion as Eddie came toppling down on him. Zeke opened his eyes just in time to catch a glimpse of Idris hurtling through the air and into the box of doom.
No!
Idris howled. Eddie and Zeke lay in a tangled mess on the floor, staring at each other. Neither one of them breathed. Zeke listened as hard as he could while Idris kept screaming.
No!
But his voice grew fainter and fainter. Zeke glanced up at Joanna. The purple handkerchiefs were shooting out of her mouth in a blur, and then suddenly, the rope came to an end. The last of the purple cloth vanished into the box. Blech! Joanna spat. She panted, making a face. Yuck! That was gross. Shh! Eddie whispered excitedly. Listen! Zeke strained his ears. But there was nothing. Idris's voice had faded into silence. A smile slowly spread across Zeke's face. He's gone, Eddie said. The two of them scrambled to their feet and peered over the side of the box of doom. A momentary shudder passed through Zeke. There was nothing but empty blackness. It was just like looking into the top hat. Do you really think he's gone? Joanna murmured. Zeke nodded. Yep. He disappeared, Eddie said. Just like that. Zeke looked at his two friends. I guess he never learned his own most important lesson. What's that? Joanna asked. Zeke smiled. And then Zeke says, never trust a clown. Come on, that was fun. That was an earned conclusion right there. But there is a little bit more, because this story has to have that little tail on the end, because the kids realized that the stuff stopped coming out of Joanna's mouth when they stopped hearing Idris. So all of this magic that came from Idris stopped when he disappeared. And so they start rubbing their faces. They realize that what was just white skin before is now just chalky, moist face paint. And the nose comes straight off Eddie's face. It's all normal once again. And there's a little closer where the parents suddenly appear at the door because the kids had the address on the business card that they got from Idris, so they know where they were, and they get in huge trouble for skipping school, for not doing the homework, for dressing up like maniacs, for then lying about this clown college, because there's no Idris anywhere, so obviously they must have been lying. And then the book ends with the kids going, you know what, I don't mind getting detention, because all of this stuff is behind me. But then there's a little hint at the very end, when Zeke gets home and realizes that the top hat is still sitting on his desk. So he picks it up to take it outside to throw it in the garbage when he hears a thumping sound on the ground. And 2 copies of the Great Clown Handbook fall onto the floor. And he hears a voice in his head. from a far off distance that says, "Never trust a clown, Zeke." The end. Okay, let's discuss. So, first thing, I want to start off some of the things that I wasn't as fond of. So, first things first, the title gets through on a technicality, because, as I've said before, I think what's most important for a story is that you're honest. Obviously, it's fiction, but I want you to be honest with the reader as much as you can be. And this book does not have a killer clown in it. However, it scrapes through on a technicality that from the third chapter until basically the third or fourth last chapter, the kids believe this legend that there was a clown who made kids disappear. You know, kids disappearing sort of implies that they died. And so they are believing in the killer clown of Kings County legend. And so it does scrape through on a technicality, but I'm not the biggest fan of that, but hey, it works, and it is honest, so that counts. And the second thing is really just some of the aspects of it that I wasn't the biggest fan of, like the fact that the body transformation seems to happen so quickly, and so they take away the opportunity for that to be tension and suspense and being, oh, what could this mean? To just go for, yeah, they're turning into clowns. But still, it was done better than I've seen before. I mean, there is a movie I saw, I do not recommend it, called Clown. It was produced by Eli Roth, and they throw in all this nonsense about clowns being demons that eat children. It was not good, and the clown transformation was overdone to the point that they make up some clown suit that's made of leather. Like, that's not fun. I like the way it's done here, how it's slow and subtle. They, get the hair and the white face paint, and then they start growing these gags on their bodies. Like, I like that. But despite the fact that this book is one of the longest in the series, it's 150 pages, and yet it seems to fast forward through the body transformation, even though I think you could drag it out a little bit, but that's a small complaint because I think that the book is more focused on the magic and how they deal with Idris, so that's okay. Oh, and personally, I think it would have been scarier if they could find Idris in the phone book. Like, the only reason you add that in is sort of imply that he sort of snuck the thought into Zeke's mum's head. But I think it's much creepy to think that, he can be called by literally anyone in town and come to their house, and if he thinks your kid is enough of a fan of clowns, then he might bring them to the circus. Like, that's a creepier idea to me. I don't know why they added that extra element in. It doesn't ruin the book, but it's just a thing I didn't like. But that's it. Those are all the things that I didn't like about this book. The rest of this stuff I really, really liked. Like, I really liked the whole fact that not only are they changing the clowns, but it's also forcing them to think a bit more like clowns and to, become aggressive with each other. And I really love the fact that Zeke is forced to laugh. That's a creepy idea. And in fact, it brings to mind an idea that I saw in another podcast called Uncanny County. In fact, actually, since it's a podcast, you could listen to it after this episode is done. So, Uncanny County, Season 1, Episode 4, called Coulrophobia. The other episodes are hit or miss, but in this episode, they introduce cosmic horror and clowns together, and they do a great job because they imply that clowns come from another dimension, and they find horrible things funny. Things like, yeah, they do balloon animals, but they do it with people's intestines, or they have whoopee cushions that explode and harm you. Things like that. But the idea is that if you ever laugh at their jokes, well then, you must have become insane enough to think like them, and you slowly start becoming a clown. Like, I love, that's a creepy idea, a great way to meld cosmic horror and clowns. So yeah, feel free to check that out at the end here. But that's what this sort of brought to mind, the idea that if you start laughing at the things that a clown would find silly, it's because you're slowly becoming a clown in this book. Like, I really love that idea. That's creepy. And I love the fact that Joanna, she has a good reason to hold on to the clown handbook. Like, it's not just a plot element like, oh, we can't get rid of them because the kids can't use them later. No, it's a part of the story because it's the only way they can stop the clown stuff happening. It's got tricks and how to end tricks. So Joanna's right. Yes, they should get rid of them, but also it's the only way they can stop it. Like, I love that so much. It's really a moral dilemma there. Oh, and I have to talk about what's brought up, clown spirit. You know why I like this so much? Because clown spirit is a real thing. Now, obviously, in the book it's implied to be magical and all this fun stuff, but in the real world, when they say clown spirit, it's the same way as like having, oh man, you've got team spirit, or like, oh, that's the spirit. They're talking about the right mindset, and the clown mindset is one where you can ignore the fact that you look ridiculous because you're trying to be funny, and you need to embrace this either naivete, or you have to have this comic perspective where you see the world from a silly point of view. And that's really what he's talking about. He's saying that these kids love pranks, they love gags, so clearly they're capable of seeing the world in this silly way, so they do, in a way, have clown spirit. And then the way the kids defeat him is because he gets all this stuff played on him, but he doesn't find it funny, even though, and this is true, like I said, I've done research on clowns. One of the key things that they teach clowns is a facet called embrace the flop. If you are trying to do a gag and you fail, you make a mistake, or something bad happens to you, then you need to embrace it and find it funny because you're trying to make them laugh. It doesn't matter that you feel embarrassed. What matters is that the clown needs to find it funny, and yet Idris fails to follow that, and so he falls into the box of doom and he gets lost forever because he's not a clown in that moment, because he doesn't have clown spirit. This is great. I really like this book. Like I said at the start, I don't think it's worth $50 or more, but this is definitely one of the better books in this series. And not just for the stuff that I'm reading into it with clown spirit and the stuff I know about clowns. Everything fits so neatly together. I like the way the characters are done, except for that one character, the teacher, who, fashion statement, but whatever. That doesn't matter. It's just a brief, it's literally a single line. The rest of the book is just so well put together that I gotta give this an A. Top marks. It doesn't get A+ because I don't like the dishonesty with the line there. I don't like some of the aspects. It's not perfect, but it is damn good. So what can you learn from a book this good? Well, the first thing I think is obvious. Foreshadowing. So for those who don't know, foreshadowing, just like in real life, there's a light behind you. As you approach someone, before they even see you, they can see the image of you, a shadow of what's about to come. And that's the same idea in fiction. When you foreshadow something, you give a hint, an outline of what is going to come before it comes. And this is very important in a book like this, dealing with clowns, because in fact, actually, this is the issue I had with the last book, is that it had no foreshadowing, and so the kids make wishes, and it felt like an and-then plot. It's like, oh, and then this happens, and then this happens. But the trick is, with foreshadowing, every single element of this book is brought up before it occurs. So during the birthday scene, even though it's introducing Idris, it's also introducing his gags, the handkerchiefs out of the mouth. It introduces the joy buzzer. It introduces the hat that makes things disappear. It introduces the gag flower that squirts. And then when the kids get the handbook, the only thing that we learn in that first scene before Eddie complains about it is the black box of doom, which will come up at the end of the book. And this is brilliant because all of these things on their own are a little silly, but because they were foreshadowed and our brain has already gotten time to get used to them, it means that when they show up in the story, we're not only ready for it, but we get that satisfaction of, oh, that's why that was brought up earlier. Okay. So foreshadowing is a powerful tool, and this book does it well. Of course, the downside is you need to be a little careful with foreshadowing, because whilst it can prepare a reader for the ending, if done poorly, it can over-prepare them and make the book feel bland, especially if you overdo it. Like, yes, this introduces a black box you can disappear into, and it makes sense, it fits with the clown theme, but if at the beginning of your story, your characters are talking about anything, and then one of them offhandedly says, oh, and by the way, have you ever heard of the Shubbalub? It's this horrible monster that's been known to eat people who wear green shirts. Like, if at the end of your story, the Shubbalub appears and kills the villain because they're wearing something green, like, yeah, the reader will have known what's coming, but they would have known what's coming because it stood out so ridiculously that they remembered it, and when it happens, they're like, oh, that's how we're ending the story with that thing you brought up? Okay, that's a bit silly. So technically, it did its job of making what happened not so surprising that it came out of nowhere, came like a Deus Ex Machina, but it doesn't change the fact that if it doesn't fit within the theme of your story, it needs to, then it's going to clash. So whilst foreshadowing is a good tool, it's not a blunt force object. You still need a little bit of effort to make sure it's fitting things in that suit the story, and also when you're bringing up these things, it's good to do it organically. Like in this, as I said, it foreshadows things in the birthday scene and when they're reading this book and just talking about it and geeking out about it. But one of the worst things you can do is do it during an, as you know, bit of dialogue or a bit of exposition, because then it just feels out of place and people are like, oh, okay, I can see exactly where this story is going. And not in a fun way, not in a surprising way, in a, can we just get this over with now sort of way. So foreshadowing is a powerful tool if used well. This book teaches that very well. Now also, This book does, context and tension really well, but I've already talked about them. I want to talk about something different, and one other thing this book does really well that I want to celebrate is it takes full advantage of the horror potential of first-person perspective. So you should know that stories can be written in first person from the main character's point of view, third person from an external perspective, or second person as though it's talking to you. But one of the benefits of writing in first person is that you can really get into someone's head. It gives you that intimacy of character, and you can see exactly how they're thinking. And in horror, one of the things you can use that for is, even when something small happens, you can build up on that by showing the main character's anxieties and also them worrying about what this could mean. So, for instance, in this book, when Eddie's not on the bus, it's just, Eddie's not on the bus, but the kids aren't just like, oh, Eddie's not here. They're worrying about it, and our kids are thinking, what could be wrong with him? Yes, we're all getting hair, but what happened to him that's so bad that he's not on the bus? Like, it adds that implication, that fear from the character's perspectives that then hints it towards the reader, and so it sort of builds up to that. It adds that tension. Now, I have seen stories do this badly, so a lot of Goosebumps books, I'm afraid, a lot of them, there will be times where a kid, they'll see something simple. I think I mentioned it before, they'll open the fridge and their sandwich is missing and be like, oh no, it's missing. Could that be because a monster's in my house and it ate it? And it's like, that's just so stupid that it doesn't make sense. These are kids, so you can get away with some stuff. I like the fact that, Joanna thinks oh, maybe his nose has grown back as a bit of foreshadowing, but I like that you can make kids freak out even more than the story offers. But so long as it's within reason, you can still use that to build that tension for the reader, because something as simple as, oh, I lost my book, I lost this powerful book thing, you can use that to build that tension of them saying, oh, what will happen if Idris found out that I lost the book, or what would happen that, you can really dig in to use that to build some of the tension. And just like the tool before, it's not a blunt instrument. You can abuse it, you can make it so that the story is worse if you do it wrong. But this book does it so well, and so that's the lesson to learn here, is that you can use that first-person perspective to build a bit more tension and hint at all of the horrors to come, even when they're not on the page yet. So, that was Killer Clown of Kings County, the second last book in the series. The last book is coming up very soon, but that's not the end of this season. We're going to have a little season here. After this, we'll go into a separate series, a different one. I think I'll save the surprise for what that's going to be when we get to it. But for now, if you found this scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.